In the heart of a city bleeding from war, where hope was just a flicker in the smog-choked sky, lived a boy named Ren. He wasn't a soldier or a hero. He was just a survivor, watching his world crumble one building, one life at a time. The air was thick with the stench of despair and the screams of the dying. Every day was a gamble, every night a prayer that the dawn would come. For Ren, seeing the faces of his neighbors etched with grief and fear, something inside him broke. He knew he couldn't stand by and watch his home turn to ash. He had to do something, anything, even if it meant paying the ultimate price. Driven by a desperation that burned hotter than any fire, Ren sought out the forbidden legends, the whispers that sane folk dismissed as madness. He delved into ancient texts, tracing cryptic maps until he found a place where the veil between worlds was thin. In the deepest, most shattered part of the city, he performed a ritual whispered only in hushed, fearful tones. He called out into the void, offering his very soul as collateral, and the void answered. From the shadows coalesced a figure of ancient terror and immense power, the Demon King. The Demon King's voice was not a sound, but a pressure in Ren's mind, ancient and amused. It saw the woe's raw, untamed desperation and saw a perfect vessel. It offered Ren a pact, a simple, terrifying transaction. In exchange for his humanity, his emotions, his very essence, Ren would receive power beyond mortal comprehension. Power to crush his enemies, to silence the guns, to save his city. Ren looked back in his mind's eye at the suffering, the loss, the utter hopelessness. With a heart heavy with resolve, he accepted. There was no other choice. The transformation was instantaneous and agonizing. Power, raw and untamed, surged through Ren's veins. It was a torrent of pure energy, rewriting his being from the inside out. His muscles cold with newfound strength, his senses sharpened to a predatory edge, and his eyes began to glow with an eerie, otherworldly light. He could feel the city breathing, could hear the whispers of fear and the marching of enemy boots miles away. He was no longer just Ren, he was a living weapon, a force of nature given human form. The first casualty of this pact, however, was his fear. It vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating purpose. His first test came swiftly. An enemy battalion, confident and cruel, marched into his district. Before, the very sight of their armor would have sent him scurrying into the ruins. Now, he walked out to meet them. He moved like a phantom, a blur of motion and destruction. Metal crumpled like paper under his fists. Projectiles swerved around him as if guided by an unseen hand. He dismantled the war machine with a terrifying efficiency, his face a blank mask. The soldiers who had brought so much terror now knew it themselves, fleeing from the bull who had become a monster to fight monsters. The city's defenders, initially wary, soon saw him as their salvation. They called him the Ashen Guardian. Wherever the fighting was thickest, wherever hope seemed lost, Ren would appear. He single-handedly turned the tide of battles that would have cost hundreds of lives. He became a legend whispered among the resistance, a symbol of their defiance. They cheered his name, celebrated his victories, and saw in him the hero they so desperately needed. They saw the power, the results, the city slowly being reclaimed from the brink. But they couldn't see what was happening behind his glowing eyes. With every life he took, with every display of his demonic strength, another piece of Ren slipped away. The joy he should have felt seeing his neighbors safe was muted, a distant echo. The grief for a fallen comrade was a hollow ache, intellectually understood but not truly felt. He remembered loving his city, his friends, but the feeling itself was becoming a foreign concept. He was a perfect soldier, devoid of the hesitation, doubt, or sorrow that made one human. He was a finely tuned instrument of salvation, playing a song he could no longer hear. His friends, the ones he grew up with, were the first to truly notice the change. They would try to talk to him, to share a joke or a memory from before the war, but Ren's responses were clipped, his smiles never reached his eyes. He would stare at them with a terrifying emptiness, a void where a person used to be. They tried to remind him of the boy who loved to draw, the boy who would share his last piece of bread. But that boy was a ghost, a memory he could access, but not inhabit. Their attempts to reach him were like shouting into a chasm, their words swallowed by the vast, cold emptiness of his new existence. The final battle for the city was an apocalyptic clash. The enemy, desperate to crush the resistance, threw everything they had at its heart. The sky burned, and the ground shook. At the center of it all was Ren, a whirlwind of dark energy. He fought with a grace that was both beautiful and horrifying, a dance of death that left nothing but ruin in its wake. He faced down the enemy's greatest weapons, their most powerful leaders, and one by one, he broke them. As the sun rose on a silent, victorious city, Ren stood alone amidst the wreckage, the last enemy fallen at his feet. Victory bells rang through the streets for the first time in years. People poured out of their shelters, crying, hugging, celebrating. They chanted his name, Ren, the Ashen Guardian, our hero. They lifted him onto their shoulders, their faces bright with gratitude and relief. He had done it, he had saved them all. But as he looked out at the sea of joyful faces, Ren felt nothing, not pride, not relief, not joy. He saw the emotions on their faces as a scientist observes a chemical reaction, interesting, but detached. The connection he had fought so hard to protect was the very thing he had sacrificed. In the days that followed, the city began to heal. Laughter returned to the streets, music played, and people started to rebuild their lives and their homes. They rebuilt the world Ren had saved for them, but Ren couldn't be a part of it. He was an artifact of the war, a weapon with no more enemies to fight. The very power that made him their savior now made him an outsider. Children who once cheered for him now shied away from his cold gaze. Adults spoke to him in hushed, reverent tones, treating him like a monument, not a person. He was a hero, yes, but he was also a ghost haunting his own home. He had won the war for them, but in doing so, he had lost the world he belonged to. The pact was complete. He had saved the city, but the boy named Ren was gone forever, replaced by a hollow champion who could only watch from the outside, as the world he loved moved on without him. He was the city's greatest hero and its most tragic soul, a permanent shadow in the bright new dawn he had created. He walked the streets not as a resident, but as a warden, forever bound to protect a home he could never truly return to. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more content like this. We'll see you in the next one.